Dominick Cruz is considered to be the greatest bantamweight in MMA. The former two-time UFC bantamweight champion used his unorthodox movement to attack from angles and throw combos. He also had a good wrestling base and was very durable. But what truly hindered him from being called the pound-for-pound greatest were his injuries. So how good was Dominick Cruz actually? Hey guys, it's Kiiyon, and today I'm going to be talking about former UFC bantamweight champion Dominick Cruz. Dominick has had a story unlike any other fighter in MMA. So today I want to look at his career to fully understand how good he was and where his legacy stands in the sport. After going 9-0 and becoming a 2-division champ, Dom signed with the WEC where he challenged Uriah Faber for the featherweight championship. The animosity from the two began when Uriah Faber didn't look at Cruz as a challenge, even saying he didn't know who he was and never saw his fights. And with the fight poster only showing Uriah Faber, Dom found his opportunity to let everyone know who he was by signing his name over Uriah Faber's face on every copy. Uriah did not like this. At this time, Dom was 21 years old and Faber was 27. The fight started with both men trying to impose their pressure on each other by pressing forward and throwing strikes. Dom was able to take down Faber, but Uriah popped back up, and while in the clinch, he threw a knee that forced Dom to go for the takedown. Faber was able to secure the guillotine choke in 1 minute and 38 seconds into the first. Following his first career loss, Dom would fight a year later on a local card in Arizona, where he picked up a first-round knockout win before going back to the WEC to fight Charlie Valencia at WEC 34 in his first fight at bantamweight. Dom started the fight light on his feet, being able to connect his punches while dodging attacks due to his superior in and out and lateral movement. He also had the notable size advantage over Valencia, which helped him attack from a distance. Mix this with his super awkward timing and movement and you will begin to feel for Valencia, who was taking a beating near the end of the first. Even when Charlie was able to connect, Dom was able to take the hits. After 3 rounds of throwing various combos and countering Charlie's attacks, Cruz took home the unanimous decision. Dom went on to fight Ian McCall at WEC 38. Throughout the 3 rounds, Cruz would give another impressive performance by dominating Ian with strikes. Dom was impressive with his footwork, where he would constantly switch stances and attack from angles with combos. His movement truly set the pace for his fights. It would start with his opponents trying to chase him down and end with him chasing them down. Mix that with his untimely head movement and he becomes one of the most frustrating fighters to try to hit. Cruz would win the fight by unanimous decision and go on to fight Ivan Lopez at WEC 40. Although Lopez was able to tag Dom on the feet, Cruz would take him down to the ground where he would maintain top position and would continue that through the second. In the third, Dom would do more of the same, but he would then accidentally land a knee on a grounded Lopez and the ref immediately stopped the fight. It seemed like Cruz was gonna lose by disqualification, but the judge ruled it an accidental knee, and since the fight was in its final minute, it went straight to the judges and Dom won the technical decision. His next fight was against top contender and Uriah Faber teammate Joseph Benavidez. The stakes were high as the winner of this fight would go on to fight for the WEC Bantamweight Championship. And the fight itself was very closely contested, with both men dodging shots and connecting with them as well. Dom had the size advantage and I was very impressed with how he was able to manage to keep up with Joe's speed. In this fight, Dom was doing really well rushing Benavidez and landing some combos that could have only been done with Dom's awkward movement and timing. He was able to mix these combos with takedowns and counter Joseph Benavidez when he came rushing in. This was enough to earn Dom the unanimous decision and fight newly crowned bantamweight champion Brian Bowles. Brian Bowles was a heavy hitter who carried one-punch knockout power, and Dom didn't have that, but his striking output was like of a Diaz brother, where he would beat his opponents more on volume than power. Dom's movement was outstanding in this fight, and whenever Bowles got close, he would counter with some hard shots. And after securing a takedown at the end of the round, Dom definitely won the first. In the second round, Cruz took over the fight. Brian became more unmotivated after missing Dom with his strikes. And Dom came back from being chased by Bowles to chasing him with combos that connected. The round ended, and during the break, the doctor waived the fight after finding that Brian broke his hand. Dominick Cruz became the new WEC Bantamweight champion and went on to make his first defense against former foe Joseph Benavidez. The stand-up in this fight was super close as both men connected with combos and counters. Joseph was able to cut Cruz above his eye, but Dom had the edge when he secured takedowns throughout the fight. And after a strong 4th and 5th round, Cruz won the split decision. At WEC 53, Dominick Cruz was not only set to defend his belt against Scott Jorgensen, but he also had the chance to win the inaugural UFC bantamweight belt, since WEC was set to fold and all the fighters were going to move into the UFC. Dom proved to be almost unhittable in this fight by dodging Jorgensen's attacks, all while throwing his own combos as well. And this was all beautifully done with his effortless movement that had Scott in all types of confusion. In the second round, Dom would mix his head movement and counterpunching to set up takedowns. Throughout this fight, Scott's corner was telling him to bring the fight to Cruz, but it was so difficult as Dom was a moving target that would counterpunch if you overcommit too much on your attacks. And that's what happened in this fight yet again. Dom would begin to go on the offense and slowly take over the fight. After 5 rounds, not only did Dom win the unanimous decision and the UFC Bantamweight Championship, but he also called out the only man to ever defeat him, Uriah Faber. After their first fight at featherweight, Uriah dropped down to bantamweight and quickly racked up a couple wins. Faber was the favorite going into the fight, and that was mostly based on his popularity at the time. So the rematch would happen at UFC 132. In this fight, Faber would knock down Dom multiple times and land some combos and counters that connected. But Cruz's movement made it hard for Uriah to build any momentum. Dom also connected as well and even took Faber down multiple times in the fight. In the end, the fight was close, but Cruz was able to win the unanimous decision. It was a very intense fight, and it was perfect for the UFC's bantamweight division as it displayed how entertaining the smaller divisions can be. And that was led with the skill that Dom would display in all his fights, which truly made his nickname, the Dominator, a fitting name. His second title defense was against Demetrius Johnson. Although Dom had the size advantage in this fight, Demetrius was really fast and that helped him connect on a few combos. But Dom was able to counter quite a bit and also secure some takedowns. He also had a couple nice suplexes in this fight as well. Also, he was able to dodge DJ's attacks and land combos of his own. The fight would go 5 rounds and Dom would take home the unanimous decision. Following this, Cruz was set to defend his belt in a rubber match against Uriah Faber. The build-up would involve the two coaching against each other on The Ultimate Fighter. But prior to their match at UFC 148, Cruz pulled out due to a torn ACL. He wouldn't fight in either 2012 or 2013. He was expected to defend his belt against interim champion Renan Barão at UFC 169. However, Cruz would pull out from the fight after tearing his groin. Cruz would vacate his belt due to inactivity and Barão was promoted as the undisputed champion. But in September of 2014, Dom finally came back and fought Takeya Mizugaki. This was a huge fight for Dom, who hadn't fought for 3 years, and many believed ring rust would be a huge factor in this fight. Yet Cruz proved many wrong when he secured the takedown early and knocked down Mizugaki on the ground a minute into the fight. It was a very impressive performance for Cruz, who showed no slowing down in terms of fighting. This was possibly even the best we've ever seen Dom. After the fight, Dana White confirmed that Cruz would fight champion TJ Dillashaw next. But sadly, in December of that year, Cruz announced that he torn the ACL in his other knee. This would sideline him for the entire 2015 year. But he came back in 2016 to fight for the Bantamweight Championship against TJ Dillashaw. These two had a lot of animosity built towards each other, with most of the beef stemming from TJ being teammates with nemesis Uriah Faber. It was also a huge fight in terms of bantamweight legacy. At this point, TJ Dillashaw was seen to be the next greatest bantamweight after defeating Renan Barão twice and Joe Soto on a day's notice. But Dom was certainly in the way of this conversation as he had built a resume that cemented himself as the bantamweight GOAT. So as you would expect, the fight was very close. Both men connected with their shots. One of my favorite counters that Dom showed in this fight, as well as his others, is when his opponent throws a light kick and he would catch and return it with either a punch or a takedown. His impressive movement was on display as Dillashaw missed many times when he attacked. The fight would go to the judges, who awarded Dom the split decision victory. This was a wild moment in the sport as it's considered to be one of the greatest comebacks in MMA, and it truly was one of the most triumphant stories a fighter has ever had. In his first title defense as the new champion, Cruz fought Uriah Faber in the rubber match. Of course, the beef was just as juicy as it was in the previous 2 build-ups, but the fight was not close like before. Cruz would dominate the third fight as he was much faster than the older Uriah Faber, who was 36 at this point. Dom's movement, angle cutting, and feints wouldn't allow Faber to land anything significant. Instead, Dom was able to connect many times on the feet and take the fight to the ground. Dom would win the unanimous decision victory, thus ending the rivalry between him and Faber. But it would sort of continue with Faber's protege, Cody Garbrandt. The 10-0 Garbrandt quickly rose in the rankings and finally met Dominick Cruz at UFC 207. I'll give Dom credit for winning the trash talk prior to the fight, but Cody gave the performance of a lifetime during it. Cody Garbrandt was the faster fighter. He dodged most of Cruz's attacks, all while countering with his own. He was also able to knock down Cruz on multiple occasions. Dom attempted takedowns but wasn't successful in securing any. The fight would go 5 rounds where we truly saw Dom outclass for the first time in his career. Cody Garbrandt would win the decision, thus becoming the new bantamweight champion and handing Cruz his first loss in 9 years. Following this fight, Cruz would say on the Joe Rogan podcast that he had plantar fascia tendinitis through his training camp prior to the fight. And the plague of injuries for Dom would continue after after a broken arm and an injured shoulder that would pull him out of 2 scheduled fights. As of 2020, Dominick Cruz still hasn't fought, and even though there's a possibility of him fighting again, I just don't think he really needs to since he's found success outside of fighting as a color commentator. And in terms of continuing his legacy, I don't think he needs to prove any more than he already has. Because Dominick Cruz was so good that I consider him as the greatest bantamweight fighter in MMA history. His fighting style, where he would constantly move and attack from angles, is what set the standards for the bantamweight division. Cruz definitely has one of the highest fighting IQs in MMA. He didn't possess one-punch knockout power, but he made up with that by dominating his opponents with constant volume. He was a master at dodging his opponent's attacks and countering with attacks of his own. His wrestling was top-notch, and he knew when to go for takedowns in order to win rounds. Dom's style of fighting usually led to very fun fights that showcased the beauty and speed, agility, and skill. It was such a shame that he suffered so many injuries during his career, as I could have definitely seen him put on even more impressive performances and possibly even become the pound-for-pound greatest. But his injuries were also a huge part of his legacy, as he showcased one of the greatest comebacks in all of sports. On top of this, he was low-key one of the greatest trash talkers, as he was very quick-witted with his verbal jabs. Dominick Cruz wasn't just good, he was outstanding. My name is Kiiyon, and this was my take on how good Dominick Cruz actually was. Do you agree, disagree, or have something else to add? Please put it in the comments down below, cause I'd love to read it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. But that's all I have for now, so I'll see you on my next one.